Back at the end of 2023, I was lucky enough that I managed to find the Fazbear Frights graphic novel 4 and the Five Nights at Freddy's movie novelization a couple weeks early. I read the graphic novel and the video on that came out back then, and although it was 2 years ago, you can check that out if you want to. But for some reason, although I started reading it, I never got around to finishing, or even getting nearly close to finishing, the movie novel, mostly because of Help Wanted 2. But then, I just lost motivation to read. It has now been 2 years, and with the FNaF 2 movie literally coming out today, and the novel for that movie coming out in May, I think it's finally time to read this book. In this video, we'll be discussing the FNaF movie novel. I'll be honest, I didn't really expect the FNaF movie novelization to include anything worth making a video about, but I thought I might as well since it is a FNaF book that does pertain to lore, and when the preview came out 2 years ago, I found that there were some interesting things in this 320-page book. It definitely ended up being more interesting than I thought, which further solidified the fact that I'd make a video on it. So without further ado, let's finally, 2 years later, talk about everything interesting about the FNaF movie novelization. Number 1. In the FNaF movie, Mike gets a tape at Freddy's, and if you look closely, you can actually see that the tape used to have the name Fritz on it, a reference to Fritz Smith from FNaF 2. Many people connected this to the security guard from the beginning of the movie who died, seeming to be the phone guy stand-in for the movie, since he was the guard before Mike who dies, and so people had the idea that this guard was actually named Fritz. But with this book, we actually get confirmation that his name is not Fritz, it's actually Bob. This makes me wonder what the Fritz thing is actually for. Obviously it's a lore reference, but is it supposed to mean anything? Who knows. When this book originally came out, I thought this also meant Phone Guy's name was Bob, but we now know with the week before that it's Ralph. Number 2. The opening scene of the movie with the guard, who we now know to be named Bob, getting attacked by the animatronics is a prologue in this book. However, I quickly noticed that this book is definitely different to how the movie is. Obviously, it still follows the same basic plotline, and some of the lines characters say are repeated the same way they are in the movie, but it's not one-to-one, which is to be expected. For example, when Bob is unscrewing the vent, he is under a table in the book, while in the movie he is just sitting on the floor. Later, after getting caught by Foxy, there's a whole scene of him getting dragged away and noticing the children's drawings, including the one of the large yellow rabbit. This is not in the movie, instead it just cuts to him in the chair. Once he does get in the chair though, the Freddy mask is described as being brown. Obviously Freddy is typically brown, but in the movie this Freddy mask is actually more green. Number 3. A few years ago now, we got the leaks for the FNaF movie characters and their descriptions, and when it got to Mike, it claimed that he was in his mid-20s to early 30s. This book actually confirms his age to be 25, which is very interesting considering what it means for the timeline of the movie. The movie takes place in the year 2000, and Mike was 12 when Garrett died, and since Freddy's is still functional by the time Vanessa gets Garrett's plane toy, that means this takes place before Freddy shuts down. Doing a little bit of math, we find that Garrett died in 1987, and honestly I think that's pretty funny considering a lot of people originally believed the Bite of 83 to be the Bite of 87, and while that wasn't the case, now the movie equivalent of that incident was actually in 1987. It's also interesting because it indicates that Freddy's closes later than it did in the games, still being open by 1987. Also, while we're on the topic of Mike, the book gets pretty much everything about him in terms of looks correct, except his height. The book claims Mike to be 5'6", when in reality he's actually 5'5". Not a massive difference, but a difference nonetheless. It talks a lot about how he didn't think he was that good of a person when he was a kid, even before Garrett had died, which fits with what we now know about Mike in the games, being a bully to his younger brother until he died. Number 4. When the movie first came out, a lot of my friends and I thought that Mike Schmidt was actually William Afton's son, with his dad in the movie actually being his stepfather. However, as time passed, that belief has died down more and more, especially when this book came out and Mike and Vanessa were implied to have a romantic relationship, especially on pages 112, 113, 116, and 186. However, one thing this book does say that could contribute to the debate is that Abby doesn't think she and Mike look alike. Their eye colors are a bit similar, but other than that they don't have much resemblance. One could argue that this is because Mike and Abby have two different fathers. Mike's father would have been Afton, while Abby's would have been the dad we see in the flashbacks. To be clear, I'm not saying that I believe this. I think the FNaF 2 movie is doubling down on the idea of Mike not being Afton's son, and I think Mike and Vanessa are very clearly meant to be love interests, but I'm also not saying that it's completely debunked. I just think this is something worth noting, even if it does mean nothing. Garrett is also implied on page 44 to be the son of Mike's dad from the flashbacks, as that man is said to look like an adult version of Garrett. So even if Mike was actually William's son, Garrett is still that man's son. Number 5. On page 20 of the book, Mike is thinking about all the problems he has in his current life, and he begins to play make-believe about what other lives he wishes he could have led. This is very reminiscent of the story The Real Jake from Fazbear Frights, a story about a young boy named Jake who has cancer. His dad secretly talks to him through a doll out of sight. Every night, the doll, Simon, would ask Jake what he did that day, but instead of explaining the different treatments or resting he actually did, he tells a story of what he would have liked to do if he wasn't in the position he was in. Something else this reminds me of is one of Circus Baby's speeches in Sister Location, where she talks to Mike and says that she plays make-believe and that she likes to pretend. Number 6. On page 23, we get our first introduction to Steve Raglan, aka William Afton. He's described as a tall, slender man, which, disregarding Matthew Lillard's actual appearance, very much matches Purple Guy from FNaF 2 to a T. It's also said that Raglan acts as if he has an inflated ego, like he believes he was the absolute best at what he does. He also doesn't have any reaction to Mike's last name being Schmidt like he does in the movie. He also scans Mike as if sizing up a cow before its trip to the slaughterhouse, which is, incidentally, exactly what Afton does to Mike in the movie. He sends him off to Freddy's to basically get him killed. Number 7. In the FNaF movie, during Mike's first dream with the missing kids, we see a boy with bunny ears and a blonde girl wearing Chica's bib. However, for some reason, in the novel, ironically on page 87, it says that the one wearing the bib is a boy, while the one with the rabbit ears is a girl. Not really sure why this is different here, but it's something I noticed. Number 8. I think this part is pretty well known in the community, especially considering Scott himself commented on it, claiming it isn't canon, but the book shows Doug to be a bit of a pervert, staring at Max's boobs in the diner scene on page 95. People were really quick to notice this since Doug was one of the fan favorite characters in the movie, and people didn't exactly like how he was shown in the book, which is fair because Doug is the best. Something else we see in this scene is MatPat's character, Ness. He's described as tall and lanky, which I guess you could say MatPat kind of is, but we do know that this character was always planned to be MatPat, as he himself revealed that his character was named Ness after his Sans is Ness theory, and his name is still Ness in this book. Plus, he drops his iconic "it's just a theory" line, so the character was evidently written for him regardless of when this book actually was written. Number 9. Vanessa is introduced on page 112, and she is described as being very fun and cheery. However, at times, she switches demeanors completely. It's even said at one point that the sun came back to her face. I assume this is meant to be a reference to Vanessa in the games. Before the movie came out, I was of the opinion that this was not meant to be a movie adaptation of the Vanessa from the games. Not because they're from completely different eras of the timeline, but rather because Vanessa's last name in the games ends in an A, and in the movies her last name is Shelley. But when the movie came out, it was revealed that her name actually is Vanessa Afton. Disregarding the fact that Vanessa may or may not also be Vanessa Afton in the games, she does literally have a split personality, Vanny, so switching demeanors completely may be a reference to that. Number 10. On page 170, Mike decides to research the missing children incident. Based on the appearance of the reporter from the clip he saw, as well as the cameras, he notes it seems to be the mid-80s, which makes sense for him to know since he would have been 10 years old in 1985, which is when the missing children incident happened in the games and the books. Unfortunately, it's not quite that simple in the movies. Mike is 25 in the movie and he was 12 when Garrett died, and since the movie takes place in 2000, Garrett's death was in 1987, like I said before. But we see young Vanessa holding Garrett's airplane at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, meaning Garrett's death in 1987 preceded the missing children incident. 1987 could mean mid-80s, but I think that's much more late 80s, so it's a bit weird, and the timing just feels a little odd. Of course, this is just Mike's interpretation of what he saw, not a definitive date, but it would be weird if he didn't find the actual date in his research too. Number 11. I want to take a minute or two to talk about a theory that is undeniably wrong. It's the idea that the Freddy bully from FNaF 4 is Fritz, the spirit-possessing Foxy. It's undeniable nowadays, especially with Ticket to Fun, that Mike was one of the guards in FNaF 2, but because of the pink slip, he is probably Fritz Smith. Both of the characters in FNaF 2 have to wear a Freddy mask to defend against the animatronics. That means Mike, who was the Foxy bully in FNaF 4, becomes Freddy while using the name Fritz. If you switch the roles, it makes sense that the Freddy bully starts off wearing a Freddy mask, and then in FNaF 2 becomes Foxy, and his name is Fritz. This would also explain why Foxy is the only character besides the puppet who doesn't get fooled by the mask, because he was once the one wearing a Freddy mask. There's also the story Find Player 2, where the main character Amy loses her friend, who has a teddy bear, to the missing children incident at Freddy's, and then she returns years later to stop the killer. That last part is exactly what Mike does, implying one of his friends, one associated with a bear, was lost to the missing children incident. This book even has Mike say Foxy's singing sounds like a bully. I actually really like this idea, but unfortunately it has to be wrong. Mike in FNaF 4, in my eyes, is probably 14 to 16, but if we go by the logic of this book, he could maybe be 12. The Freddy bully would theoretically be Mike's age, so by 1985 and the missing children incident, he would be 14 or older. And in Into the Pit, it's said that none of the missing kids are older than Oswald, who is 10. The exact same happens here, where on page 211, Mike asks Abby about the missing kids, and she says they're younger than her, and she is, again, 10. So the Foxy Freddy bully idea is verifiably false. Still a fun thought experiment though. Number 12. On page 226, Mike finds the Ella springlock suit in the back room, and Vanessa explains the springlocks just like in the movie, but what's extremely weird is the size. Ella in the movie is just as big, if not bigger, than Chica, yet here, she's apparently only 3 feet tall. This is super weird because springlock suits are made for people to wear, and most people would not fit in that suit. It's super strange, but it gets stranger when you realize that in the novel trilogy, that's actually accurate to the size of the Ella doll, which I should say happens to be the same doll that becomes the first Charliebot. Each of the Charliebots, even the first one, have mini doll versions of Ella inside, and disregarding the huge illogistics of this, the fact that it's a 3-foot tall springlock suit makes it seem like there is meant to be a mini doll inside her here too. That implies that there are Charliebots in the games one way or another. Or at least that there are robot people. This is a theory that does exist, especially when it comes to Vanessa given her sudden eye color and demeanor changes, but considering the many connections the Silver Eyes has to the movie, William Afton using a fake name and helping the main character get into Freddy's, the main character having a brother who got kidnapped by Afton exactly 13 years prior, Freddy's being abandoned, a character almost dying to a springlock suit towards the end of the movie and being rescued by the protagonist, Foxy searching for someone as they hide behind arcade machines, Afton showing up as Spring Bonnie and working with the animatronics before they realize who he is, Afton getting springlocked and dragged away by the animatronics, and Freddy's being destroyed by the time of the next installment, all of that is exactly the same in both. So, although everyone hates the robot kids, I honestly would not be surprised if that's where we were heading. Just don't be shocked if the second movie has Vanessa die and get replaced by a circus baby or something. That probably won't happen and we'll find out literally today. Some of you guys might have already seen the movie by the time you see this video, so I'm probably wrong. But also, this might happen in the third movie, I don't know. But still, if it happens, I just won't be shocked. Number 13. On page 273, Vanessa tells Mike that Garrett preceded Freddy's and that he wasn't stuffed into any of the suits. However, later, Mike hears a voice calling his name, then looks to its origin and he sees Garrett there at the archway leading to the entrance of Freddy's. And we know this is his spirit because he literally warns Mike that Afton is coming and then disappears, and Afton walks out of the darkness. Vanessa claims that Garrett dying before Freddy's means that he isn't in the suits, and while that might be true, that doesn't stop him from still being here. So how is he here? There's a few options. A, his spirit follows Afton. B, his spirit follows Mike. C, he is attached to the building. D, he is in the animatronics and that simply happened later. I've already discussed how Garrett is the bite victim equivalent for the movies, so this might give some insight into what happens to the bite victim in the games. I'm personally a believer of Shatter Victim, the theory that the bite victim's memories are attached to each of the missing kids, so in order for him to be set free, they all have to be freed at the same time. It's probably a stretch to say that's the case in the movies, though very well may be, but Garrett's appearance in Freddy's seems to imply he is tied to Freddy's in some way, and if Shatter Victim is canon, the fact that the bite victim died before the missing kids isn't exactly a knock at that theory, since in this movie he also does, and yet he still ends up being here. Number 14. At the end of the movie, when Mike visits Vanessa, he has a bit of a monologue that is completely different in the book. In the movie, he talks about how appreciative he is and how he hopes she gets better, but in the book, he just gives her life updates, mentioning how he got a job in construction. This is interesting because Mike and Vanessa are clearly each other's love interests in the movies, and especially this book. And I talked earlier about how the movie seems like it takes a lot from the Silver Eyes, and the sequel also seems like it might be similar to the Twisted Ones, considering it's the aftermath of Afton getting springlocked, and the characters are visiting a different Freddy's location that has a balloon boy, plus the animatronics are, for one reason or another, outside during the events of the story. Maybe not, but we'll see how it turns out. But what I mentioned earlier was that Vanessa could end up being the Charlie stand-in, so it's really interesting that her love interest gets a job in construction, and in the Twisted Ones, John, Charlie's love interest, also gets a job in construction. Something else to note about the book connections is what Afton says to the animatronics while he's getting springlocked. In the movie, he of course says his iconic catchphrase, "I always come back," but here, he says, "I killed you once, I can do it again." This actually reminds me a lot of FNAF 6's Insanity ending, where Henry talks about how, despite already killing the missing kids, he again robs them of all they have. Interestingly, that is referring to how he combines the missing kids to make the remnant for the fun times. The fact that he says that here could be a hint that the FNAF 3 movie will add the fun times and be similar to the fourth closet. Who knows for sure, but I think it's an interesting idea. Number 15. On the very last page of the book, the page showing the Golden Freddy kid shutting the door on Afton, it is said that he thinks the blood on the floor might last forever, and that he also wants Afton's pain and suffering to last just as long, if not longer. Ever since the first Ultimate Guide came out, there's been a lot of debate about whether Cassidy really is the one you should not have killed from Ultimate Custom Night, or if it's actually Andrew like in the books. The debate mostly stems from whether Cassidy is vengeful at all, and whether Andrew even exists in the games or not, with most people believing he doesn't. I am in the minority, and I do think Andrew is in the games, but I don't discount the belief that Cassidy is a vengeful spirit. I think she probably is, and this is one of the big reasons I think so. I just don't think she stays that way forever, nor do I think she's responsible for Ultimate Custom Night. But if you disagree, that's perfectly fine, and this scene definitely demonstrates that she does want Afton to suffer. But that was everything I noticed in the FNAF movie novel. I just wanted to release this video in time for the second movie since it does come out today. I was gonna release this video a couple days ago, but I happened to get the Ultimate Guide 2 early, so I focused on my 2 videos on that. If you haven't, go check those out. I've kinda just been reading this book during my downtime since I'm in university and I have breaks between my classes that I sometimes don't share with friends. So typically I would read during that time. But now that I'm done reading this book, there's some other books that I'm gonna start giving that same treatment. Up next, The Silver Eyes, a book I read 6 years ago and want to revisit. That video, and the videos I'll inevitably make on the Twisted Ones in the Fourth Closet, will not be out for a while, but if all that sounds interesting to you, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and stay tuned for everything I have planned for the future. But that's everything, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys!